much the start of James's story. He's middle of October. He's come across to the Western Front. He's come across from the UK to France. But by mid-November, he's here in the worst place on the Western Front, which is the Ypres sector. And where we're standing now, oh yeah, I'm sorry. I'm gonna apologise loads of time for vans and cars. Can't do much about that. So where we're standing now is a really critical part. We know within a week of him being here, he was wounded. We also know, which if you look at the film, I think I've got a little diagram on the film of how they move them back through the medical route, depending on how severely you were wounded. He clearly isn't wounded that severely. Jeff's sweeping around. That was Ypres in the distance. You want to just show is that the cathedral spire?
Oh, wow.
You might be able to make it out of the corner of the barn in the distance.
Oh, it's so flat.
Yeah.
It is, yeah.
So we are really, really close to
cover.
Ypres itself. And this bit from, we'll cover it when we jump in the car. But this was a terrifying area. We're looking up now. These are the communication trenches that James was working on. And we suspect you can see the gullies here. I think there's every chance these are where the trench lines were.
Whoa.
Yeah, I mean, the sort of drainage ditches now, but it just makes you wonder as to whether or not, it follows the sort of trench line that might have been there at the time.
Yeah.
And as we spin round, what we know of James's story, there's a 50-50 chance he was wounded here. I know there are 3 men wounded here and just up the road, which we'll do in a minute. And the first story, which is here, 1 man was killed and 2 men, the chap called Fred William Davis was killed here and 2 men were wounded. There's a 50-50 chance one of the 2 men wounded was James, and it will be here, or 50% chance it was just up the road from here. So we'll do the 2 of them. But the incident here happened, if you just see in the distance, Burr Crossroads Cemetery. So Menin Road is just alongside that cemetery. But we will drive down to that. We'll keep filming when we do that.
Yeah.
So we know that James's story was that they were laying 660 duckboards and stools from down by the cemeteries all the way up here to the top of the hill. So they weren't in battle. They were just working, repairing trenches, etc., etc. But as always happened in this sector, you're likely to get shelling at any time, and they've been hit by shells. So clearly, James had some sort of a shrapnel injury that looks to be minor enough that it only kept him out for a week, and he didn't go beyond the field ambulance, which is the first stage of your medical route. And that ambulance that was where you saw the cathedral there is just this side of it, so no distance that he went at all.
So that railway wood that you can see up.
Yeah, can you see the wood in the distance there?
Yes.
Is that?
Yeah.
That's railway wood.
Yep.
Is that where a load of the engineers were that they were tunnelling?
Yeah, that's right.
Underneath.
Yeah.
Right.
To set the mines off at Huge Crater, probably.
Yes.
But I think there's a memorial up on the top of the hill.
Yeah.
To the Royal Engineers.
Wow.
And you can see the crop. Jeff, we're referring to the crops. Look how tall they are.
I don't know if you can see the corn field in the distance there. And it's Brussels sprouts, I think, at the foreground, then corn in the background.
Oh dear.
So here is Jeff's got. This is where we stayed last night. This is Hooge we're in, and we know one of the wounded men on that day, on the 29th of November, was wounded at Hooge, where this huge crater is. We'll jump out here. So this is our. Go on, Jeff. You can talk to that.
Yeah, in the background, it's now a children's amusement park. So that's what that obscure building is in the background. But this is the hotel that we stayed in last night.
Nice.
And this used to be the stables of the main chateau, which the chateau has been destroyed now. So this was just classed as the stables building, but it's now quite a substantial place and a multi-room hotel.
Looks really nice.
But it's just in the grounds of a lot of memorials, really, from the war, and the sort of bunker positions here, and old shells that they've picked up. So, don't know if you can see the gun on the top of this bunker here that's in front of me. You see a rusty gun.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
if we just hold
Yes.
here, the crate, what as Jeff was saying, our tunnelers put mines underneath this area, and you can see it. Gosh, does it retain its history here? Look at all the shell cases.
Wow.
But the remains of the crater, if we just walk round this, you'll see it better.
Yeah.
You can see the green.
This is a bunker. You can see the concrete brickwork of the bunker.
Yes. And you can see the doorway down.
These are the wire supports,
Yeah.
you know, the barbed wire. So
Yeah. Wow. Gosh. Yes.
There aren't many places like this around here. This is right here.
it's got a load of green algae on it, but this is actually a pond, which was made by the by the mines going off, and formed a huge crater.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah. And then you can see another concrete bunker in the distance, hopefully. Sort of a grey stone, and then some leaves on top of it. And then every now and then you'll see a sort of corrugated archway that is part of the tops of the trench. We might have to go through the other gate, Chris, maybe, to get that.
Wow.
So where, and it's funny, isn't it? This looks such a peaceful, well, it is beautiful spot by a beautiful hotel. But where we're looking at now, you know, I'm not sure the numbers now, but certainly over 1,000 soldiers were killed when the mines were let off. So this was a scene of devastation. And the photographs of this area that I put on the film around the whole area from here up to Polygon Wood were all pretty much the same. If you remember, it was just devastation. No, hardly any trees left. I would say it looks like the moon, all the craters and all the ground turnover. But this was as horrible as it gets now. So hope you've enjoyed that. I'm glad that we got you. It is wonderful sharing it live with you.
Yes,
it's wonderful.
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
Brilliant.
I think we feel you here when we do a live Zoom. It feels like you are, you know, to get James's family here, you know, being able to talk his story on the first spot of significance in his war was when he was here and he was wounded. So I think it's a nice start to our journey. So right, on that note, then we're going to dash because I think we're 30 minutes behind schedule, Jeff.
Well, that makes a change, doesn't it?
So that's no lunch, no toilets.
Oh, sorry.
All right. No, it's okay.
Right. I don't know how to stop this now, Chris.
Oh, right. So I can do that. Right. So see you all soon.
Pull the plug. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks a lot for dialing in.
Safe travels.
Bye then.
Yeah.
Bye.
Safe travel. Bye.
Thanks.
It's November the 26th and 27th. James is in the front line here at Ypres, on the Ypres sector for the first time. So this is his first experience of a trench right at the front. And we're standing at Clapham Junction, as the soldiers called it. And just sweeping round now, you can see Menin Road. So we're at the junction of Menin Road and Clapham Junction. And on the far side of the road is where, when the Third Battle of Ypres started on the 31st of July 17, so before James was involved, the British troops, the Commonwealth troops, were coming up from where you see the trees now. Was a ridge, so they were coming up the high ground to the Menin Road, and the Germans would have been where we're standing now, would have been on this side of the Menin Road. So this area would have been really heavy fighting, you know, and part of that horrific battle on the 31st of July. So you can see, I think I said it earlier, the Men in Road was just the most horrific name probably across the Western Front. We're looking down it now, and this would have been James's journey was up to here. He was wounded probably half a mile or so down that road, which we started our trip with. But his actual journey started here. He was here for 2 days, and ironically goes back to safer ground to start repairing some trenches, and that's when he got wounded, because the shelling just hit this entire area, not just the front line. And you can see there are 2 monuments on either side of the road, of the Men in Road, commemorating regiments who fought in this area. And looking back towards the trees is a story. We're actually going to jump into this now whilst we're here. Jeff's great uncle, James Gatley, was tragically killed on that 31st of July, so we have our own personal story from here. And he died at a place called Stirling Castle, that the British soldiers called it, and we're kind of looking at it now in the background there. There's nothing there now, but it's only a few hundred yards from where we're now standing is where another James Gatley died. So it's really nice to remember him. So rest in peace, James. So that our 2 Jameses were very much within a very close proximity of each other, albeit just a few months apart.
Yeah, so although it doesn't, I don't know if the camera's picking it up, but it probably doesn't look that much of a slope, but you imagine trying to run up that, when you've got people sniping at you or machine gunning you from this side, and it's quite a climb up there, I think, when you're under fire.
We're now on the 7th of December. We're very much following James's story, almost on a day-by-day basis. We know he was wounded, very inconsequentially, a week's recovery. He then comes here, he's next back. We're just further up the Men in Road, and he's here. I think, Jude, you were very conscious of Polderhoek Chateau. So he's here. Polderhoek Chateau, there is no chateau left. It was destroyed even through the war. So we're looking at the ground in front of you. You can see a building in the distance. Just this side of the building, so in the open fields here, was where the chateau was. And it was we're very much on, again, usual thing, the Germans on high ground here. And at this period of December, James is here through Christmas 1917, and we'll just go, there's now the A19 has been built. He didn't have an A19 in 1917, but we just see across from the main road where the 4th Company got to, so this is very much James's company, is on the high ground. Again, you can see a building in the distance. I don't know if that's a farmhouse, but on that top ledge is, and we found it from the coordinates on the trench maps, that is exactly where James was. So they made the high ground in the middle of December, so they fought well to get that, but couldn't get the chateau. They couldn't get the ruins of the chateau, so they were stuck on that ridge for some considerable time. All the reports say that winter of 1718, I think they said, was the worst for 50 years. There was snow, it was freezing cold, and they were basically stuck on the top there for 2 weeks. But when you read the stats from the diary, I won't go through them all, but on each day there were lots of shelling. Between 1 and 8 men each day are killed or wounded, so they were very much in the firing line, even though they were kind of trapped up there. They were attempting to improve the trenches. So many of them were just filled with water with the thawing of the snow and the horrible weather they were having. And I think I said that James was here on Christmas Day. So on Christmas Eve, there were 2,000 German shells sent over here. 6 men were killed and 20 wounded. So, gosh, he's had a tough time, hasn't he? And the War Diary picks up a German patrol that came out. They were trying to destroy a pillbox, and they got a German pioneer, so this is a guy who would have been repairing their trenches as a prisoner, so would have got a lot of information from him. So yeah, this whole site, this, you know, would have been probably the first time that, well, undoubtedly the first time he's in active service. He wasn't just at the front of the trenches, he's fighting here. So he and the 4th Company were put out to gain this high ground, which they succeeded. As I say, sadly, and we can finish on it, the chateau, it would have been so lovely to have had a relic. You might remember on the film, I had a photograph, an aerial photograph at the end of the war of where the chateau was. There was nothing. It was just, the ground was devastated, and you could see a bit of a concrete block. Well, that's what we're looking at now, and obviously, you know, it's now just a farmer's field. But again, I'm going to say it, I find when you do these things, I mean, this is such a significant piece of history, certainly for the New Zealanders, you know, for the 2nd Battalion, and you just wouldn't know it. You know, it's such a, I want to put a marker in here to say what went on here and who was here, but lovely to share it with you. It's in James's history. This is really, really important. So this is Frederick William Davis, who died on the 28th of November 1917, and we think was possibly alongside James when he was killed. He was one of the 2 incidents from Hooge and from the Burr Crossroads. So he died as part of the work that James was doing. So he's no known grave now, and that's partly because they think when he was buried, that area was shelled to bits, and tragically all the soldiers buried there. The bodies are now never recovered. So he's remembered here as part of the machine gun corps, but we know he was with the 4th Company with James. So we just thought it would be really lovely to pay some respects to him. They went with songs to the battle. They were young, straight of limb, true of eye, steady and aglow. They were staunch to the end against odds uncounted. They fell with their faces to the foe. They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them. So we're now at Polygon Wood Cemetery, which is literally just across the road, the small road from the new British military cemetery. And I'm a bit surprised that didn't have a cross of sacrifice, because of any cemetery of a certain size, and you've just seen the cross of sacrifice there. We're guessing this one covers both cemeteries, but they are really beautiful. And they do feature, it's clearly a Christian cross of sacrifice, but they do kind of feature in the centre of the cross what looks like a dagger pointing into the ground, and that was a really significant part of the design, as it was meant to signify the end of a battle, where a soldier would thrust his sword into the ground. So it covers both the Christian angle and the end of battle. But I mean, this one is really striking. It's on the raised ground, and we're here because we have another friend of James's, and undoubtedly would have known him well. He was the quartermaster. We'll find his name in the register. Ooh, watch the barrier. Yeah, so he was Robert Arnott, and we found him here in the register. Company quartermaster. We know he was with the 2nd Battalion, and he was killed in action on the 12th of December. And the 12th of December is when the battalion were at Polderhoek, trying to get Polderhoek Chateau. So where we describe being on the high ground there, just the other side of that busy main road, that sadly is where Robert lost his life. So we found his grave, and we'd just like to pay our respects to him on behalf of James, in a way, because I'm sure he would love to know that we were doing this. They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them. So we've just come through Polygon Wood Cemetery, and as we come through the gate here into this field and what is Albania Woods in the distance, we're the middle of February. This is the 15th to the 21st of February. James is only a few days away from leaving Belgium and heading down to France, where we know the spring offensive of March would be the most significant thing for the battalion. But where we're looking here, it's actually in the field here where there were support dugouts, and they were here, say, only for a week, and even though they were just support dugouts, they were constantly being harassed with gas shells and artillery firing on them, and the stats are really, quite frightening. On the 16th, 2 were killed and 3 wounded. On the 18th, 8 were killed, 15 the day later, 5 the day after that. So many soldiers in this field with James lost their lives, so about 30. So as I say, despite it being just a support line right by Polygon Wood, they had a torrid time. And after here they moved not very far. They're still pushing towards the front line. They hit the front line again for 2 days, which we're going to visit now, and at the end of that they then head for France. We're now into the last 2 days that James is over here in Belgium. So it's the 22nd and the 23rd of February. It came from the support dugouts at Albania Woods, which we said was horrible. You know, a week in there, gas shells. But Albania Woods is just over to the right as I'm standing here. So we think about half a mile, maybe a bit more than half a mile, as the men would have come through. And where we're looking now in these fields was very much the frontline trench. So he's got 2 days here. And in those 2 days, actually it sounded less frightening, ironically, than the support dugouts he was in. On the 22nd there were 2 officers wounded, and on the 23rd there were 2 other ranks wounded. But at the end of the 23rd, that's it. And he then jumps on they move back through to Burgh Crossroads, back towards Ypres, and then they're on a train and heading into France. Quite some way down in France, and we know his story then becomes 3 weeks later the Spring Offensive is active, and James and the 2nd Battalion are all over that. So it's a goodbye from Belgium bit of his front line.
Were you saying it was 3 miles away from?
Oh yeah, all of this we've just done from when he arrived by Hooge, where we started the story from, when he was wounded so quickly. Yeah, you're right, Jeff. That total distance that they've made from the Menin Road there to here is about 3 miles in 3 months. So they're doing about a mile a month. So they're on the offensive, and they are pushing back from Polygon Wood, but it's very slow, isn't it? And a lot of men losing their lives over that period. So we're now at the camp. When they'd finished at the chateau, Polderhoek Chateau, this is where they landed. So we're just southeast of Ypres, and you saw there, Jeff just homed in. So we're really just on the outskirts, but we're actually at Zillebeke Lake. So I think if we walked out, it's a really pretty spot. This they were away from the front line here, but on one of the days I did notice a couple of people were killed here from shelling. They're never away from that when they're in Ypres, which is, you know, I keep saying it's such a horrible part of the First World War, this. But whilst they were here, this was when their Brigadier General Braithwaite, who was the commander of the 2nd New Zealand Infantry Brigade, was moved out from this camp on ill health. He seemed to have been a real bloke who was really admired, so I think it was a real big deal for the men for him to go. But yes, they had a week here, so they came from the chateau, where, if you remember, they didn't quite get the chateau, but they got the high ground, and they came back to here for a week until about the 22nd of December, and then they were back at the chateau again, where they were kind of at the front line again for Christmas.
And I think the camp was somewhere in the east.
Yeah, looking at again we got the coordinates from the war diary, and it has it on the edge of the northwest end of the lake, which is where we were just standing. So I think it's there. I think it's in the fields that you're looking at, and it's going to be a sizable camp.
There's the spires of Ypres again in the distance, and we're now at somewhere called Walker Camp, which is a place called Etaples, and we think that the camps were all around these fields. Again, we've got a load of corn that's sort of blocking the view, but it looks like it's fairly flat ground, because this was a divisional reserve camp. Chris is saying that it's probably absolutely huge and would have had probably wooden buildings on it as well as tents. And they were here for a couple of months. It was December and January, or January and February.
is our James. God bless you,
Yes.
James.
Ah,
Do you know, it's such a privilege for us to be able to do this for you guys today.
oh,
Yeah.
wow. Wow.
And do you know, after all the 100 hours I've researched him, I feel I think I said to you the other day, he feels like part of my family. I feel I know him.
Yes.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we know him so much better now.
Obviously,
we
yeah,
do.
but there's no words on his grave. So his mum and dad would have had the option to put some words on the grave.
Okay.
And there's nothing for James. So often soldiers didn't have anything. I can see a few here that haven't. I think that's often because it was just so upsetting. You know, people didn't want to
Yeah.
particularly think about it. But I'm correcting that today. So I want to leave here something so that, because not many soldiers here have got personal memory. So I bought the usual sort of thing, but lovely, it's got a poppy on it.
Ah.
Lovely. Oh, thank you. Yes.
lovely.
Yeah. I see the poppies that I super glued on have been removed.
Yeah, they don't keep them forever, Jude. We always think that's a shame. So I can put this
Yes.
around.
You can see in the middle. Yeah. The silver fence. Oh, that's lovely.
Yes.
Gosh, that tree's growing fast. Yeah. Mm.
And I didn't know what to do other than the cross. And I thought, I normally thought, I was going to, like you did, Jude, I thought it'd be nice to have his picture here to remember him. And I thought, do you know what would be even nicer is his family has no chance to come out here to see his grave. So we're going to be doing that for all the members of you as well. So I thought what would be really wonderful is to have his family's picture with him by the grave.
Oh,
So,
that's lovely.
so it's the whole family sitting by him, but actually added to that, again, I was going to think, there's some lovely words to put together. And I thought, well, this is madness. Jude, you sent me the memoriam that his mum and dad had sent. And I thought, well, isn't that what we put here? The words they chose a year after his death to remember him, they're the perfect words to put by his grave. So I
Oh, lovely. Oh, thank you. Oh, that's super special.
think you
Yeah.
couldn't get anything more poignant. I think I'd like to say the words, actually, because again, they must have thought they didn't get to put words on his grave, but these clearly are the words they would have chosen. I think we can say. So I think I'd like to read these while Jeff looks at his grave. So they wrote, I should say, in sad but loving memory of our dearest son and brother, Corporal James Hellyer, who died of sickness at the 26th General Hospital, Etaples, France, on May the 13th, 1919. We were not near him when he died to hear his last faint sighs or whisper just one word of love before he closed his eyes. Missed, sadly missed. And I'm just going to finish as we have throughout the week. They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them. We will remember them.
Yeah.
Oh, God bless you, James. And I'm really pleased. Headstones weathered well. Some of them you can hardly read the names after 100 years or more. His is really immaculate. And even the crest, the New Zealand crest, it's all just beautiful. And the little planet will actually protect what you put in, which I'm really pleased to say. So yeah, it's I think it's just lovely that his family are here after all this time.
Yes.
Okay. Right. Okay, well, I'm sorry you had to stay up so late for that, but it obviously.
No, it's a pleasure. Yes.
it does
Yeah.
feel like you're here, you know. I know it sounds really funny that, but when we share them live like this, it's not just Jeff and I on our own. It genuinely does feel as if the four of us are standing here.
We're now on the spring offensive. Most of what we're going to do today is the spring offensive, and the first thing today, we're at the new British military cemetery at Couham, and we're here. This is really appropriate, hearing the firing in the background. There are two of James's colleagues from the 2nd Battalion who died at Gomacore. They were at most of July. They're at the frontline trenches at Gomacore, and two very significant deaths here. One in particular that I did put on the film, you might remember, who was R.C. Travis, who got, you name the medal he could get in the war, he was awarded it. Victoria Cross being the event, you know, that he eventually died. But James came here, the 2nd Battalion came here. They were buried with full military honours, and the Otago 2nd Battalion were part of the day, so it's quite something for us to come here and stand where they would have. So the two graves, we've already put the poppies in. We thought the ground's really hard, so it took us a little bit of time to make enough of a hole, and beautifully there's a little New Zealand flag and a cross that someone else has been here. And Sergeant Travis went over the top 15 times. You think what a remarkable war he must have had, how he'd survived all that, but sadly died on the 25th of July. So I'm really glad that we're standing on the ground that James stood on to remember these two really brave soldiers. They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.
Yeah, we're at the farm. And it's quite appropriate we've got the sound effects, because the story of today is mostly the spring offensive. There's a couple of bits after that, but almost all of it is this Collincombe area. And we know the New Zealanders were amazing at Collincombe. They kept the line. So where the spring offensive, so much of it, the Germans just came through incredible distance. They did not get through this area. So it was a tremendous effort from the New Zealanders and, of course, James. But where we are is really lovely. In fact, in the diary, the officer who writes the notes of the diary refers to it as a charming spot where this was their headquarters during the spring offensive.
All
Wow.
right.
Where-
Wow. Look.
Where Jeff's looking is the drive through the trees there was really pretty. And then when you come to the farm on the top here, I mean, there would have been thousands of men here. This would have been probably every field you can see would have been filled with
Yes.
tents.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
it's
We've just walked down the road a little bit, but it's very flat up on the top there. So
finished with
so
Oh,
if
yes.
we had, what did you say there was, Chris? 1,500 men.
at least 1,500
So
from the two. So the Otago 1st and 2nd battalions were here. So there's about 1,500 men, and I suspect there'll be other groups here as well. We are only 4 miles, 5 miles most to the front line that we're going to do through the day.
Gosh.
So they're not very far
Yeah.
away from fighting. And in fact, the diary
No.
refers to they're still getting artillery shells hitting them here. So you're not exactly safe, even though you're back at the headquarters. But looking at the timings of it, if you remember when we finished off in Belgium, he was there at the Ypres sector until late February.
Yeah.
And then he comes down to France. Third week into March is the spring offensive. So his story and the New Zealander story through March through to the mid-July is holding back this charge of the Germans. And as I say, what we're going to do today, we don't travel very far because it was a fantastic effort that New Zealand held the line. So he keeps going back to the same, pretty much the same frontline trenches. So you'll see that as we go through the day. But here, I've got the exact dates, which is probably worth quoting. So 18th to the 20th of May, he personally, James, I should say, is at the headquarters here. The 2nd to the 8th of July, and the 26th of July to the 8th of August. And the 8th of August was the start of the 100 Days Offensive, which was very much towards the end of the war. So when they've left here, it's the beginning of the 100 days when the war was then ended. So I think this is a real, which is why, not just because it's in the morning for us and it's not too late for you. I thought this was a really poignant place for you to see.
Yes.
Very, very special place in their history. So, and clearly the
Absolutely.
farm, it's marked on the trench map, and the farm, there's new bits here, but you can see the old building. You just picture it with all those men around it, you know.
Yeah.
So have you got the,
Can't.
it was the YMCA cocoa and biscuits or
It
something?
was, if you remember in the film, there's the picture
That's
of the
right.
YMCA.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
they were here. Yeah, they were here.
They were here.
So it would have felt such
Amazing.
peace, wouldn't it, from what they'd come from? It would have felt something
Yeah.
like a normal life. I think it's
It
worth us
would.
walking to, as Jeff was saying, this is the farm. I haven't got the exact coordinate. You see, it's such a big place when it's the divisional reserve or the headquarters. There are so many men here. They just refer to it in the war diary as the Rosigno farm. And that is the farm that we marked up on the, and it is the same farm. We checked the trench map. And so we are in the right spot. But you'll see as we come up this incline, that's not a Jersey cow. It would have been appropriate, wouldn't it, for your story?
Yeah, I was just thinking, is it? No, it's not.
It
No,
should
no.
be, though. It definitely should be.
It should be, yes. How
If we'd
dare they
written the
not?
script, it would have been.
Yeah. We can always take that out and put a jersey in.
I can do, yeah, I can be clever on that. So you can see how it's opening up now.
Yeah.
So the farm's on the
yeah,
left.
Yeah.
So you can see some of the new builds there of the farm. So as we look out, and we're now facing where the front line would have been.
Gosh.
So we'll be heading that direction.
Wow.
But this is a really, really large open space, which is why it will have been chosen.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's amazing it's still like that, isn't it? Today.
Oh,
all the
do you know what,
years
Jude?
later.
Jude, these places, and you'll see it even in the battle scenes, the ground, the concept, it just hasn't changed. There's, other than farming, there's really nothing you find in these places.
No.
Incredibly quiet.
Yeah, all the small woods that were about at the time, which are just stumps, in all the photographs. The woods have just come back in exactly the same place as well. So it's not that they've taken the opportunity to plough it all up and plant crops instead. They still do have the woods in exactly the same places as was there before the war. Yeah, but these are big big flat open fields, so you can imagine, there being 1,500 men really
Yes.
knocking about in these.
Gosh.
And the end to our story here is when James is first here. It's the 18th to the 20th of May, and at the end of the 20th of May, again, if you remember in the film, he had trench fever.
That's right. Yes.
Which he got in the trenches further
Yeah.
towards the east there. So as they've arrived at Rosignol Farm, he's only been here 3 days, and there were a few of them. I think in the war diary it referred to almost half of the battalion suffered it, but it got sorted quite quickly. So he was deemed to be ill here, and the day after, the 21st of May, 1918, he moves to Louvencourt, which is where the 3rd field ambulance was, so in effect a hospital, and he was there for a week. We're going to go there now because the building that he was in is still there.
Oh,
Yeah,
gosh.
yeah. So it's been great to see that. So it's nice actually we've got this bit in order. As I say, he's here from the spring offensive fighting. This is the first respite he gets, and he's ill, and we'll now go and see exactly where he was. So we're running a bit behind time, but this was the last
It's
Zoom
all right.
today. You'll all be able to get to bed at a good time now.
Oh, no, that's not a problem. Gosh, it's lovely. He probably would have been able to get his shoes off, his boots off and that, wouldn't he? And dry those feet out and stuff with being here 3-4
if you
days.
think of all those, all through Belgium, even the conditions were so awful. You're right; his feet would have been in water more than not.
Absolutely.
So it's no surprise that so many of them. I'm sure it said half of them suffered, so they were in a bad place when they got here, in a bad state.
Yeah. And you've got to assume that having come through that awful winter as well,
that's right.
that May in France is very pleasant normally, so it would have been a bit of warmth and a bit of sunshine, just like it is today, really.
Yeah. Well, all through Vietnam and that, they only got to change their socks every 7 days, and so I wonder what it was like in the First World War. They probably didn't get as many changes of clothing and stuff.
Well, in fact, it's interesting reading the diary. Only a couple. We're not going to go there, but a couple of miles from it, Bertrancourt is where they had baths, and you see it quite a few times in the war diaries. There's one village where they put a temporary bath, and the men all go there. So they're not bathing at all. They're not washing at all for about 3 weeks, and then they all pile in to get cleaned up and in some cases better uniform. So it's a real.
You'd want to be first in the queue, wouldn't you?
Right. And I think I'd go to the back of the queue and go in again.
Yeah. I think that their clothes were pretty lice-ridden, weren't they?
Yes.
For the troops, troops in general, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
And I've just noticed here, interestingly, Chasse Reserve, which is
sounds like decent wine.
Yes, it does.
saying this was the reserve headquarters.
Oh my goodness.
All right.
I think we can say that's a sign in memory of them.
Absolutely.
We do need to move on. We've obviously got a lot to do, but it's lovely to share a really important place in his story, a really memorable place.
Yeah,
in his story.
It is.
So
great.
okay, so lovely seeing you again. Watch out for the next few films that we send through.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye then.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
See you later. Thank you.
See ya.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Hello, mate.
You don't trust you. Don't blame you, mate.
We've just come from the headquarters for the spring offensive at Rossignol Farm, and within 3 days of being there, James and 6 other men from the 2nd Battalion were found to have trench fever, and they were treated for, or James was treated for a week. And this is the site. This is the 3rd New Zealand 3rd Field Ambulance. It was actually here for a good couple of years. So he was, as I say, was here for a week before he went back up to the farm again. I'm just really pleased that the building is still here. That it's yet another brilliant piece of the jigsaw we've managed to get on this trip. Jeff's about to get run over to give you a better view of it. We're now in the middle of the road, Jeff. Oh yeah. So he would have been very poorly. We were talking about the horrible conditions he'd been in. No wonder so many of them went ill. And he would have spent a week here recovering. Yeah, later on I found on I think around the 1st of July 1918, they're back in Louvencourt to get washed, ironically, yes. But I don't think I'm going to find the location of where the temporary baths were put up. But yes, this was just lovely to be able to take it in on the trip. And hopefully he was really well when he came out of here. He was fully recovered. Okay, so that's it. So we're now on the next the next few parts of our journey. We are really going to be around the Collincombe area. So we're now going to find out all those locations for the 2-3 months of the spring offensive that they fought at. So it'd be lovely to give you the detail of those. Collincombe is probably one of the most infamous names in New Zealand military history, and we know James was a really significant part of that. So where we're standing now, probably of all the places that we'll be visiting today and tomorrow and have visited, this is probably one of the most important, and it's the trench where James and the 4th Company, so this is really detailed, the 4th Company of the 2nd Battalion were here at the time. This was the frontline trench. So he's come, where we're looking now is Collincombe is in the distance, so we're just east of the village, not very far east, and you can see this is quite high ground, I mean, as much as it ever gets, but this is quite a slope up from Collincombe. And there's those photographs that I put into the film that show the machine gunners in the crops, you can just see them above the crop. Well, that's where we are now. So that photograph is quite emotive, and it's brilliant to stand here.
So just in front of that tree there, you can see the cross of sacrifice, or I can just about see it.
Yeah.
I can't zoom in any further.
That's okay.
And that's Euston Road Cemetery, and about 25% of the soldiers that are in there are New Zealand lads.
Oh.
From sort of the late March. And then just zooming round past the car, there is another cross of sacrifice just in front of those woods there. So we've not been to that one yet, but obviously there's 2 cemeteries very close here together, and they're on the trenches that James was in.
And again, it's a feature, isn't it, Jeff, of the First World War, that they buried them where, pretty much where they fought and died. They didn't move them very far. But with 2 bits of the story here, we know exactly here is where James first came in the frontline trenches. So he was here at the end during April, back end of April, a month later, we've been to Rosignol Farm. When he's relieved from the front line here, he ends up as far west as Rosignol Farm. So it's not very far away, and they come all the ways back to here, to Collincombe, back to Rosignol Farm. But at the end of May and up to the 1st of June, he's where we're looking now, and you can just see in the distance a couple of roofs, there's a red brick roofs. Well, that's Lassigny Farm, and I made reference to that in the film, that this is where, so not at the same time, but in 1917, Wilfred Owen, who is probably the most significant war poet in the UK. Most schools will take Wilfred Owen's poetry. Well, he was there, so for the real keen followers of Wilfred Owen's life, Lassigny Farm is a really important place. So James got here, you know, just a little bit after Wilfred Owen was here, and the grounds rises quite significantly here, doesn't it, Jeff? Up to the
certainly out of Collincombe, of course. And then, amazingly, this is more or less 2 years after the Battle of the Somme.
Yeah.
In exactly the same place.
Yeah.
But 2 years on.
And we're now not very far away from Collincombe. You can see the sign at the back there, and we've come from, I'm pointing the direction, you probably won't see it, but the Euston Road Cemetery, the Cross of Sacrifice is just visible there, certainly to us. Just the other side of that, so where the trees are, just the other side of that is where we showed James on the front line at Collincombe. So it's a very short distance. I mean, we could probably walk there in a quarter of an hour, but that's, as you were saying, Jeff, that's a really good thing, because this was very much the New Zealand troops on the defensive. This was the spring offensive where the Germans, everywhere else, they seem to be making incredible distance. It's a remarkable story of what the New Zealanders did. We're here 2 months later, we're now at the end of May, and we're still here. The New Zealanders are still defending this ground, haven't been pushed back. I love the fact that in the war diary, in the location, the officer actually said it's at the sugar factory, and the sugar factory is still very much there. And the coordinates from where they were is right on it, so they were probably around this building as well. Oh, it's just another lovely piece of his story to be able to be here.
Sign there for Ocean Villas as well, Chris.
Yeah, which is next door to Beaumont Hamel, again a major part of the Somme fighting. That a lot of the stories around the Spring Offensive we're going back to places that would have been in the Somme. It must have been desperate for men who'd fought so hard for places in 1916 for them to be taken in the Spring Offensive. And when James came here at the end of May, this was day one from Louvencourt, from the 3rd Field Ambulance from the hospital. So he had a week recovering from trench fever, and he's in the front line, so he didn't go straight into the reserve camp or into a support trench even. He's come right here to the front line. Fortunately, the 3 or 4 days he's here, it referred in the diary to it being quite quiet, that there was, most of the action seemed to be our own artillery.
Probably noisier now with motorbikes.
Wouldn't you know? So yeah, most of it was our own artillery. So that's the end of May, and a month later, we're now at the end of June, just looking kind of the other side of the stop sign, looking to the fields there beyond, were the support trenches. So he's here then. So if you drew a triangle really from where we are, from Collincombe to the sugar factory, and then back to the yeah, that's right, and that's his story really. This is where James was for the entire spring offensive. The fact that we can see pretty much the 3 locations says how brilliantly they did, that they just weren't pushed back.
We're now in Hellyer, and there was some support trenches that were here at the beginning of August, and they were actually here in May as well. It looked like it was going back and to between the front line trenches and the support trenches, both in May and August. But as you can see, there's, like most of the other sites, there's just fields here now. So peaceful though, so beautiful.
So we're now at Hellyer, which is just to the northeast of Collincombe. We've had the story of the spring offensive and really the heart of where James was fighting. So we're not come many miles up here, and actually this is, Jeff just did a bit about the support trenches just on the other side of the village, and we're now at the front line. We're back at him being in the trenches. But interestingly, when you look at the dates he's here in May and he's here in August. So clearly the first time he's here, they're holding still. They've pushed up a little bit further, but they're still keeping that line during the spring offensive. And then in August, he's here between the 8th and 15th. Well, we know that was when, as we now know, it was the last 100 days of the war. So it was the start of being on the front foot. And just here, again, we've got the coordinates. It's just great to be able to do this. That you wouldn't know it. It's a field with no marks on it at all. But this is where the trench line was for the 4th Company. So again, very specific to James, that the field we're looking at, and probably heading in the direction of the windmill. Yeah, was the line. It's a fairly long line, kind of almost back into the village. But this was them. And listening to, reading the diaries of the time, both periods seem to have been reasonably quiet here. I mean, there's artillery fire on occasions, but there's nothing of huge significance. So I think they worked in the August time, they were working with the New Zealand engineers, so feels to me like they're probably repairing some old trenches that were in a poor state. And Jeff laughed about in May in France, probably the weather was a little bit better for him. But we just had a look again at the diary entry for May, and it was the opposite. It said that it was wet and muddy, wasn't it, Jeff? It was
certainly in the trenches.
In the trenches, yeah. But so this is, we're kind of at this crossover now, and much of what we're going to do, definitely tomorrow, is all about the last 100 days, and we will be moving quite some distance. We've hardly moved anywhere today. We're in this little pocket that they were involved with. But with a start now, we go from here. There's Gomacore, where we saw where the 2 soldiers, we saw their graves where they were killed at Gomacore. It's no distance from here, and then very much we're heading out east. The German spring offensive ended on the 18th of July, and on the 19th of July James is at Gomacore, which is just by the wood you can see in the distance. You can see the water tower. Well, that's pretty much on the outskirts of the village of Gomacore. And the night of the 19th, there was a massive artillery bombardment on Rossignol Wood, and the 4th Company, James, the ground we're looking at is where they advanced. So the wood is there in front of us. So it was blasted on the 19th, and a patrol at night on the 19th advanced from, go back to where the water tower was, that was their evening raid, and by the 20th the Germans had pulled out. So the ground we're looking at now between the water tower and the wood is where James would have come right across. Of course, looking at the maps from the time, there were just trenches everywhere, and there would have been barbed wire and rubber. It would have been horrible coming over here, but they advanced to just in front of the wood, and it was the start, it was the turn. This is 2 days after the Germans kind of pulled back from the spring offensive. So it's our last story really from that period of time. We've got a couple of places we're going to visit now to finish our day today. They're very much the 100 Days Offensive to the end of the war. This is kind of it for James, where that defensive line ended, and they were very much on the front foot from here.
Did you say there was some sort of HQ just to the left of that water tower, Chris?
Yeah, it's where the 4th Company's headquarters was. Right. So that would have been a very temporary thing set up near the front line.
Very close to the front line, though, isn't it?
I think we found that, haven't we?
Yeah.
You know, there, and I think they said that even though they were there, and they weren't there very long, but the HQ was bombed, so there are still shells coming down.
There's a man walking along with a shotgun now and 2 dogs.
I think we better go now. Yeah. We're just looking now at Rossignol Wood, which is where James and the 4th Company had forced the Germans out on around the 20th of August, that they've cleared. Very much, as I think I said, they're on the front foot. So we're no distance. We're now on the 23rd of August, just coming down the hill from Rossignol Wood, and James and the 4th came down here to the larger wood you can see there, which is Bois de Bièze, and all this area on the 23rd was full of the whole brigade now. So we're talking about more than just James's battalion. So all the fields we're looking at would have been absolutely full of New Zealand soldiers, and this is because the battle for Bapaume, the second battle of Bapaume, had started 2 days earlier, and the New Zealand forces were going to be thrown into that. So just for this day, and it sounded like their journey between the 2 woods, there was some confusion. It wasn't as straightforward as it looks, because they were quite heavily shelled by gas, which I guess would have had them running in all sorts of directions. So there was some confusion as to where they had to end up, but they did end up here, and they are only here for a day, because the 24th of October they're going to head out to hopefully help take and capture the town of Bapaume.
And although this road probably wouldn't have existed in its current form as a track, it will have existed at the time, so it could well be that James and his fellow soldiers have come down this actual road to make it to that woods there.
But this is different, isn't it now? This is, the New Zealanders are attacking now. Everything from here on in, they're pushing the Germans back.
But they wouldn't have known whether or not the Germans were going to mount yet another counter-offensive against them and push them all the way back again.
Yep.
So it's only with history that we know.
That's right.
That it was a big push.
Yep.
But they wouldn't have known.
On the 21st of August 1918, the second Battle of Bapaume started, and James and the 2nd Battalion were here, ready to be part of capturing the village, it sounded like it was just unbelievably busy, and just even getting through the tracks and the roads, they were just heavily weighed down, so really struggled to get anywhere near the place. So after a day of concentration in that area, they were pulled back. They were told to come back to exactly where we're looking now. These fields are between Grevillers, where you can just see the church, and Bapaume. So they remained here for a week, and you can see there's the Grevillers cemetery. We've just been in there and found some New Zealand soldiers who died during this time, so we went to quickly pay our respects to them. But they were here, as I say, for a week, and they had heavy casualties around this time, but it said in particular, it commented in the diary that the men were badly shaken. So I think they'd had a really bad experience the day before. Even here, the enemy are continuing to fire shells and gas, so there was no rest whatsoever for them. They also, whilst they were here, buried their dead, and they worked on the trenches. The enemy artillery was ferocious. The aeroplanes were very prevalent. They heard on the 29th that Bapaume had been evacuated, and on the 31st of August they were kind of ready to go at an hour's notice, but nothing happened. They stayed here a day. So 31st of August 1918 they stay here.
And all the New Zealand lads that were killed all look to be buried together, all
Yes.
alongside one another.
Yeah, and all killed in that last week in August.
Yeah.
21st of August, the second Battle of Bapaume had started, and fierce fighting had already occurred, but by the 24th of August, the 2nd Battalion, the Otago 2nd Battalion, and the 4th Company in particular, that James was in, came to come and help capture the town. When they got to here, it sounded like they were savaged by machine gun fire just outside, and there were so many troops, vehicles, and it just sounded chaotic on the roads. They couldn't advance for two reasons, and the diary made reference to the men were really shaken by the experience here, so it does sound like they were having a really rough time. So the 4th Company retreated to the sunken road, and we are very much, we're given the coordinates from the diary, not quite as specific as some of them, so we're doing a bit of a guessing game, but we're definitely within the line here, and we think where we just come from felt right for where would you be to be hidden, because we really couldn't see over the rise here. So this feels, it's certainly in this area, and that made an awful lot of sense to give that feeling of the sunken road. So for 24 hours James would have been here, as I say, sounded very shaken up, very scared, and at the end of the 24th of August they made the decision to bring the 4th Company back, not very far back, but to be out of the firing line that we're standing now.
So Grevillers is just at the back where Jeff was looking at before. So they've marched at the end of August, they've come from there to, I'll get out of your way here. So if you can just see, I hope the screens are big enough. Can you see kind of the ground there? And if you just look at the farmer's field, it dips at the end. So you can see
Just on the horizon.
yeah, just on the horizon, you'll see it clearly dips.
So that was quite a steep climb up there to get to where we are now. So there's one steep climb, and then there's another one.
And that, so just over that horizon, over that dip, is where they were on the 1st of September. And this is the battle, and this area, the battle finished on the 3rd. So he's kind of still involved in that fighting. But just over the ridge there, they got there on the 1st and waited there. It says in the diary they replaced the 2nd Auckland Battalion. But whilst they were there, they were shelled really heavily, and planes. There seems to have been a lot of German planes in this area, as many of the days record heavy shelling, heavy bombing from the planes. So 1st of September, they're over that rise. And on the 2nd of September, and this is very much a Lewis gun story, this is James with the 4th Company coming very much in the ground. We swing round now. They fall all the way up this hill with a creeping. Remember on the film I referred to the creeping barrage. They had that here, but the creeping barrage went too far. It failed really, and 400. So where we're looking now, the Germans said the trenches were full of Germans. So James's company received heavy casualties on the ground we're looking at now, but so did the enemy. It sounded really horrible here. It sounded as if many men lost their lives. So the first attack failed a wee bit, and at 1 o'clock they attacked again and were successful on the second time, even though the Germans fought really heavily. And by the end of the day, they surrendered freely, and I think there were 200 prisoners captured with a tank and with loads of equipment. So it's a 2-day period here, and the rest of the trip that we're going to have is a little bit like this, that they're just going from the start of September through to the end of October when James came to London. His war was over at that stage. I think we only go today about 20 miles. So in the 2 months, even though it's now 100 days offensive and we're on the offensive, we're pushing the Germans back. Not very far, 20 miles, you know. But this is different. It's a different story now. We're on the attack, so every day it is an advance from the Allied forces, and obviously successful. But as you'll see as we go through today, it's still at great cost. And this is a classic example. German morale was shattered by this stage, and at the end was imminent. But the battle here, the gentry, was no different. Both sides were equally giving it everything, and many men lost their lives here. So that story does get repeated. But yet, once again, we just have a last look at it, Jeff. We just had
we're right on the brow of the hill here, so that's where the German positions would have been. You can see as the cars go past us, they'll dip down quite sharply. So I say we're right on the top here.
And this would be the ground that they were trying to take. Germans are always on the high ground, aren't they? Always.
It's also flat, isn't it? Like there's no cover anywhere. That's always what I think. It must have been terrible. And if you think of all of that being so muddy and gooey, goopy and terrible.
You're spot on, Sharon. Whenever we do these, we've obviously done loads. We always say the same thing. Incredibly exposed.
Exposed.
You can see for miles. And the men are running towards this, and even though it could be a mile away, but the German forces are, you must feel incredibly exposed.
And if the aeroplanes are after you as well, then they've got a good sight of you. There's no woods or anything to hide in from the planes.
I know.
Yeah. And Chris, we've had over 760 something hits so far, people looking at your. Yeah, is it 700, Hamish? Yeah.
I saw it.
You guys must have put it out on social media, haven't you?
No, we haven't. It's just YouTube.
500 and something when I saw it.
Sorry, 500.
And it's really excellent. Yeah,
it's getting over 100 a day.
Yeah,
yes,
it is.
Amazing.
It's a really affecting story. I found, just as the story of a young guy from the edge of the world.
Yeah.
And just being wrapped up in events as there would have been thousands of hundreds of thousands of people in that situation. Just these, it was a really affecting a really affecting narrative.
Just a remarkable story, isn't it? It
Yes.
came through. When you think we came through, it is so tragic that we found it really sad at Etaples because so many of the graves in that corner of the cemetery are soldiers that died after the war was over, and it doesn't matter whether you were killed, in 1917 or 18 or 19, you're still a horrible victim of the war. It just feels more tragic when they've survived this, the nightmare in these fields.
Yes.
How cruel that is,
All the cemeteries along that coast, but probably not at Etaples, but certainly at Wimereux, you can see the White Cliffs of Dover.
Yeah,
you know, in the background. It's sort of so close to so many of them to being completely safe, and yes, you know, they just haven't quite made it. Yeah, so sad.
Incredible, isn't it?
Anyway, right, we are going to crack on. So we've got loads still to share with you, which you'll be picking up in the morning. Jeff refuses to send any of these out after about midnight your time because he thinks we'll be waking them all up.
No, we're not. We're still up and awake. We're up and awake. We don't go to bed till about 2.
We're in Haplincourt Wood, although it doesn't look like it from where we're standing here. But when James was here on the 11th of September, 11th to the 13th, he'd just come from the fighting that we'd shown earlier at Bangor. This was a really thick wood here, and there's pretty much nothing of it left. And they were here for a couple of days, basically repairing themselves, repairing their equipment and their uniforms, their clothing. It was a calm few days, and whilst he was here, a significant time in his war, he was made corporal. So on the 12th he was made corporal, but they were here for a couple of days and then went back for a couple of weeks, basically pulled away from all this. So it was the first time they'd had some sort of a rest. I think I've said on a few occasions James didn't get many rests. He did for a fortnight after the horrors they'd been through, but they're back here again on the 26th of September. This is now one day before the Second Battle of Cambrai, and they are very, very active. And the story that we're now going to follow, we're a little bit from Cambrai, but that whole area, he's very much part of that. One other thing to point out that we can see here, the men were in the wood, which we're standing in what would have been the wood, but the headquarters was just in the distance. I think you can see there's right at the end of the road, you can see a roof of a barn there. That would have been where the headquarters was. And they were here on the 27th at 11 in the morning. They were told, be ready for battle. And it was we're going to sense that now as we drive it. They were quite a long way from their rendezvous point for the battle, much further than they normally are, but I'm guessing they thought this was just a safe place. So we're now going to go from here following that battle, and we're not going to bring that dog with us.
Yeah, not for the first time on our trips have we upset it.
Yeah, and it won't be the last time.
And did you say that the end of September is the start of the attack on the Hindenburg line?
It was part of the Cambrai battle, was part of the bashing through the Hindenburg line, yeah. So we are getting very close, not that they would have particularly known it, to the end of the war here. And we're only a month left of James's war, because at the end of October he was in England. I did say that Bangor, we then went into Haplincourt Wood, and that was kind of the end of that sequence of fighting. And a day out, we recognised from Haplincourt, which is, you can just see the church in the distance. Well, that's Haplincourt. We came from Haplincourt Wood, and that was the end of the 2nd of September. But just for one more day, James has got one more day in this battle up into this direction. It's to a place called Bertincourt. We're right on the edge of it. The headquarters on the 3rd of September is where we're looking now, and the men would have been in the fields that you saw right at the beginning of this. You can see Bertincourt there, the signpost. When they got here, this is very much a Lewis Gunn's story. This is James's very much. Where behind the sign is a place called Rouellecourt. That was the direction of fierce machine gun fire coming from the Germans to where we're now standing, and it sounded like the Lewis gunners, James obviously being one of them, fought that off. So for one night that they were silenced, and they stayed here the night of the 3rd. So they did bump into resistance, quite strong resistance here, and it is from here was the end at this point in time for the battalions fighting until the back end of the month.
We're just outside of Beaucombe, 28th of September 1918, and we know that James was to the west of the village and the Germans were the other side, and it's saying that they sheltered in a sunken lane overnight, but it's pretty difficult to tell, I suppose, as to what was actually here at the time. But certainly we're in a field at the moment which looks well below the road level now, so whether or not that was classed as a sunken lane at the time.
29th of September 1918, it's now 2 days into the fighting for the Battle of Cambrai, and the 2nd Battalion, the Otago Regiment, are here, and we're looking at the headquarters for where the 4th Company was. Just you can just see that building just in the distance, and then you see the track on the right hand side. Well, we're standing at the top of Welsh Ridge, and the regiment, not the 4th Company. James and his mates would have stayed back at headquarters, but this whole area we're seeing now, Welsh Ridge, was taken by the rest of the regiment and captured. Sounded awful. Extreme difficulty in the attack. They didn't know the ground. They'd no maps. Night was dark. Wire and shell holes everywhere. This would have just been really horrible. But they did reach here, and the 4th Company came behind them. So James did come to the top of this ridge, but he wasn't part of the fighting to secure it. And once it was taken, they then moved to Sunken Road, that had taken much fighting to capture. And the Sunken Road, the diary gives us coordinates, and there, where you can see the trees, the little wood here, the few trees, it's somewhere around there, probably just the other side. So he's very much in reserve, following behind the other companies in this part of the battle, but from here we'll move and we'll very much be actively engaged. The Battle for Cambrai, James was actively involved in through to Welsh Ridge, which we'd just seen. Not very far from Welsh Ridge was Bonavis Ridge, which is just behind me, and this is the village of Vaucelles, and there's a really big abbey here that was part of the Hindenburg line we've just been to. But James and the 4th Company came past the sugar factory, which is over to my right, and came down to this bridge here, and they were attempting to cross this bridge, but they found, it was a nightmare trying to get over it. The bridge had been partially destroyed, and they got across the other side of the bridge on the bank. They had heavy German machine gun fire, so they were driven back, and Lieutenant Broadgate was killed here, and it was just an impossibility they agreed not to go any further in the day.
At this point. So, and did you say the bridge had been partially destroyed as well, Chris?
Partially destroyed, and the engineers, when James was here, the engineers were trying to repair it, but they were also, of course, being subjected to machine gun fire. So they stayed here until the end of the night and then retreated back to Bonavis Ridge.
Which is up there somewhere.
Yeah.
So having not been able to make it over the bridge, you can just about see the main road dipping down to the canals over on that side. Having not been able to make it over the bridge, they then retreated to this Bonavis Ridge, which is obviously quite high up compared to the canal. So it must have been a lot safer up here and away from the machine gun fire. And then it's over the brow of this hill is where they've just come from for the previous day's fighting.
We're now at Vertenu Farm, so we've moved out to Briestre, up the very steep slope and then come down again, and 4th Company came down this hill, came past this farm on the 23rd of October. We're in the last week of James's war, and as Jeff, you mentioned to me, he's a corporal now, so he's a man of real responsibility, leading his men through here. And we know, coming past the farm, they then crossed the stream. So the St George's River, and this is the spot. We've fortunately got the coordinates again. So
St George's River to the French.
No, it is in recognition. So
not much of a river, right?
No, it's not.
But they will have actually crossed this bridge.
Yeah.
It is the main bridge across.
And we're going to take you now up. You can see the road. It goes up quite noticeably, and as they get to the top of where this road is now, is pretty heavy for the 4th Company. They get hit very hard with some machine guns on the top there, and we'll take you through the next 2 places. They are successful, but it's his last, certainly while he was with the company, it's his last fighting of note. So close, week to go, as I say, before he then went to England. He is involved in some heavy fighting, and he'd come back, Jeff, did we say, from 2 weeks prior to this?
A week.
A week.
I think, yeah. Beauvoir somewhere.
Yeah.
So, and it looked like it was fun and games there. For
That's where he met the king.
Football matches, and where he met
Yeah.
the king. The king was doing some sort of presentation.
Yeah. To all of them, yeah.
To all the troops.
So do you want to just have a look back?
See that
Oh, but that's a wow, that, to see the little bridge that they came through. So having crossed the river and walking up the crest of the ridge, which we can see here, James and the 4th Company crossed the ground that we're looking at. Quite a steep climb. You can see the trees in the distance, and there's a church there. That's the area of Vertinu that they came up from, just by the farm. So it's come up all the way over this land here, and as we swing round to the right, they got really heavy resistance from machine gun fire, from German machine gun fire in the fields that we're looking at now. And you can see how steep this is. But it says here, which I think is a lovely story for James, that the 4th Company came under really heavy machine gun fire and they were held up. But the diary refers to really clever skillful use of Lewis guns won the day. So they captured 90 prisoners and several machine guns. It was an important step on the way to finally defeating the Germans. There is another spot after here, so they, having fought off this resistance, again just going further beyond where we're now standing, heavier resistance was met, and we'll have a quick look at that. But when that was taken at 2:30, that was it. And I've got stats for the round here. 1 officer was killed and 9 other ranks. 2 officers wounded, 54 other ranks wounded. So 10 men killed and 56 wounded. So they might have taken this land, but at quite a price. We're now just at the other side of the ridge, where we said the 4th Company took the 90 prisoners and finally beat the machine gunners. We are the other side of that ridge, so just thought it would be interesting to see it from all aspects. Again, you get a scale of how the land lies. You know, how the top of that ridge would have been really so tough to take, and they took it, and they've come down here. So, you know, it's another brilliant view of it all.
And that's crossing all the streams coming over here.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it wasn't very big the first one, maybe it wasn't very big the second one. And they've sorted here, but there was still, we've got one more place to visit, not very far from here, which is the very final piece of action at 2:30 on the 23rd of October. The 4th Company met heavy resistance again, but it was all over at 2:30. Then the Germans surrendered at that spot.
Well, in the distance there, I think you can probably make out the rooftop of a farmhouse.
I can see that, yeah.
Yeah. I think that's probably that Mesnil farm.
That's on the
map.
The war map.
So they came actually through that farm.
Okay.
There, and then they've done a slight dogleg right.
Yeah.
Into some fields which are behind us.
Yeah.
Which hopefully we'll be able to get through a different route, but that's where they are in the fields behind us, which was the final battle that they had at 2:30.
Yep. And the last bit that they had to take, having fought so well and so bravely, and as the war diary said, so skillfully, the last heavy resistance from the German forces is over to the right, where you can see the crops, and you can see again the high ground there, and there was heavy resistance, but it's the 4th Company that's done this. I should stress that this is very much James leading his men, and the 4th Company performing heroically. And when they'd finished here, I suspect as a recognition of the tough time they'd had, they then had a few days in the billets nearby, and we know by the end of the week James was heading to England. He was heading out of the war altogether, because by the time he came back, the armistice had occurred. So it feels really strange, doesn't it, Jeff? After 30 locations, you know, that we've visited, we've really followed in his footsteps. I don't think you can do more justice to a soldier's story in the war than we've done, and it's been, well, I can say personally, incredibly inspiring. Doing the film was fantastic. I really wanted to do it for Jude. You know, I'm really glad that film's out there. It does really change it when you come and visit these places, because they're not just a town's name or a village name. I think what really strikes you as we're looking now into these fields is exactly what these men had to go through. And okay, we're seeing them on a nice sunny day, but it gives you much more of a feeling of the nightmare that they had to go through and how brave they were to carry on. You know, and the New Zealand story we didn't know much about. It's pretty obvious that the New Zealanders really held the line during that spring offensive when it most mattered, and then were a big part. We're not very far from Belgium here, so they were a big part of the push. So go on, Jeff. I know we've done loads of these, but what's your overriding impression?
It's been great, and great once again to do it. Just so much of it, I think. When you go back towards the coast, you realise just how far away from the fighting that they actually seem to be. You know, when we were following the previous story that we did about the English machine gunner, about Bernard, it was Hellyer, where he did a lot of his training, was just a really beautiful location. It must seem miles and miles away from anything on the Western Front. But then you see what James has been involved in, both in the mud of the Somme area that he was in, and also the area around Ypres that he fought in, which obviously was absolutely horrendous for all of the war. And you've got to say that all these guys really are absolute heroes. You know, young men, you know, from New Zealand. Might have been exciting for them to start with, to come halfway around the world to have the excitement and the thrill of it all. But then when they've got here and seen what it's actually like in reality, and the absolute killing fields of it all, it can't have helped but affected them. Obviously a number, you know, lost their lives, and James didn't survive that much longer after the war, but even the lads who survived and gone back home, the memories will have lived with them for an awfully long time. So, and it's been a good story, and it's so good for Chris and myself to be able to follow a personal story of somebody, and for you to be involved as well, either through watching these WhatsApp films or from dialing in on the Zoom meetings once we eventually all figured out how to do it. A lot of editing there for Chris to do to cut out the rubbish, but yeah, it's been really great to share it with you all. So thank you very much.
In this WhatsApp group, you do feel you're part of the one family when you follow a story like this. We'll never forget James, and we'll never forget how you all have wanted to follow and have respected the story and the journey as well. So it's a thanks from us, and we'll speak soon.